Hey guys, for this week's tactics video, I wanted to look at targeting lone characters. This is the first video where we're going to look at someone else's play. I played John recently. If those of you who've been watching the channel for a long time, John won the first Old Hammer event with Dark Elves. And hey, since then, although we haven't played in a tournament setting, I met and played with him in my new Beastman Brayheads army, which you would have seen the video for earlier in the week. And while I won pretty easily in the end, and I think I had I probably had a harder list in general, at least a more tournament type list. I do think John showed me a few things, a few tricks that are worth learning with his sorcerers on a steed. I think a lot of it comes down to how you target lone characters and this part of the rule where if you are within 3 inches of a friendly unit that contains 5 or more models of the same troop type as the character, you can't be the target unless you're the closest target. It's worth noting that this works in combat as well. And I think it should. I think that the game is trying to represent a sort of swirling melee, and you don't want to take too much if it's completely formulaic or chess-like. Well, why don't we just go and play chess? I think the reality is the unpredictability of Warhammer and the dice rolling is a feature, not a bug. And there are things you can do, but if they come across as sort of generalship and in character, I believe, of the various parts that you're using to fight a battle, I think they should be celebrated. And in this case, I think what John did in this game is clever, but also thematic and immersive. So I'll point out right here, just you can see, I don't want to be a bit where's Wally about this, but he has a unit of 5 Dark Riders skirmishing, and next on their right is a sorceress on a steed. So level 2 only. It's set up in this way. So at the moment, this is an impassable piece of terrain. You can see units here while they're infantry. It would be very difficult to target this as the closest unit. John also got to go first, and we're far away from one another. Like he knows I have Vile Tide and Wind Blast. Wind Blast is about 18 inches. So he's going to very likely stay out of any sort of trouble to begin with. So early on, you can deploy this unit. It's a cavalry unit, so it's going to be protected by the Dark Riders to some extent. As the game evolved after the first turn, he's been able to pull this sorceress over here, and now it's behind the Cold Ones. So the Cold Ones are cavalry, same unit type. And what that meant is that then it is also being shielded here by not being the closest target. So I think that's really important because he knew here I have this little wizard that I was trying out, a level 1 with Skin of Man and Vile Tide. So I could just pop out, have a crack at getting off on a 7+, one of the most powerful spells in the game, I believe. And in this instance, I wanted to target his sorceress, but I couldn't because it was within 3 inches of another unit of the same unit type, and it wasn't the closest target. So the Cold Ones would have been. So he was able to shield that unit there. What happens here too is he then brings back, these Dark Riders have moved back. They then move into the space, or one of them does anyway, between the Shartak and the Sorcerer. So obviously that would be a great result for me to charge that. If he flees, I can get into the back or redirect anyway elsewhere. But the Dark Riders come over and end up in this zone, which leads to this sort of situation. So right now, you've got the spawn gets in and the Dark Riders get in. Of course, if I win combat, this sorceress with the spawn is going to be in trouble to some extent. However, if you watch the battle report, you would know that I lost this combat by a musician, and then a series of hilarious things ensued. At the same time, if the Dark Riders lose, that Dragon Ogre is going to have to pursue directly ahead and probably go outside the base of this sorceress. So it might seem a bit finicky, but all of this was communicated by John in advance, and we were moving the pieces to be able to get that intended outcome. And there wasn't much any fiddliness about it. It just looks, I guess, once the game evolves, it becomes less angular. And overall, that's probably a good thing. So what ends up happening is those combats evolve in a particular way, and then the sorceress in the final stage is able to target my character, who is not the same unit type as these things anyway, here, and not within 3 inches of another unit of the same unit type, and it gets hit by some sort of magic missile, like the summoning, I believe it was, in the end. So it was very end kills it. It might have only been 80 points or so in the end. It was very clever. And while the sorceress itself met a untimely demise where the spawn was able to get it and it wasn't able to run away in time, I just came away very impressed by the different ways that you could manipulate the targeting lone characters rule to have a lot of influence over the board and escape being targeted at particular times that would have been devastating to him. So on top of that, I believe that it's something, if you've been watching our videos, we interviewed Pash from the UK over his non-mounted, well, his Chaos Lord was on a Barded Steed and he made it all the way to the Esport 2 final with that, where he lost to a Chaos Lord on the more predictable Chaos Dragon. Both of them were tooled up, but he had two level 4 sorcerers and a Chaos Lord on a steed. And what that meant was he could start them in Knight unit or a Marauder Horse unit, and they had different sorts of functions, or he could start them out of the unit and they would be protected by this targeting lone characters rule. And I think that's something really important to consider. You might be able to build an entire army around this. I've been sort of looking at High Elves with Walk Between Worlds and the Barded Elven Steed having countercharge and being able to maybe take a BSB and a Sorcerer or even a Lord and be able to move those things around and change the nature of the units. When people talk about infantry or even sort of your basic cavalry being good, I think the pathway to them to being better in combat is through buffs, and often a character at the head of them either casting spells on them or adding that level of combat punch, particularly when it's protected by a champion for challenges, is how you sometimes make them better. I don't think you can escape the reality that with the expanding power level in Warhammer over the last 40 years, that infantry win more through things like combat res than other things. And in some ways, I don't think that's the end of the world. In others, it might not be as thematic for some people, but these little things, I think, are examples of how the rules can be written in an abstract way, but when you see them come to life in the hands of a particularly skillful player, you can see how battlefields can represent that immersive concept of a fantasy war that is going on in our minds. Once again, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.